You ever notice how sometimes life feels like you're running, but you don't even know what from? You keep moving, filling your time, distracting yourself, but deep down you know. You know exactly what you're avoiding. That's what Jonah did. God told him to go to Nineveh, to deliver a message that could save an entire city. And Jonah, he booked the first boat going in the opposite direction. He thought if he could just get far enough away, maybe God would stop asking. I know that feeling. Because I did the same thing. There was a time in my life when God was calling me towards something bigger, something that wasn't just about earning money or passing time, but about creating impact, stepping into the life He actually designed for me. But instead of saying yes, I said later, and later turned into years. I'd help out in our church's bread delivery business just enough to get by. Then I'd go home, turn on my computer, and sink hours into online games. And I don't mean just casual playing, I was addicted. I'd play until 3 or 4 in the morning, wake up at noon, repeat. I told myself I deserved to relax. I told myself I had time. But the truth? I was running from the uncomfortable work God was calling me to. Jonah tried to outrun God, and it took a storm and a giant fish to stop him. For me, it was the day I saw my biological father after his stroke, paralyzed, struggling to move, trapped in his own body. That moment hit me like a storm I couldn't ignore. I thought, if I keep living like this, wasting my time, my mind, my health, I'm going to end up trapped too. Not in a fish, but in a life that was too small for the calling God gave me. Here's the thing about Jonah's story. The storm didn't come because God hated him. It came because God loved him too much to let him stay where he was. And I believe my broke season was the same. God allowed me to feel the emptiness of my choices, so I'd finally turn around. I realized that the money I didn't have wasn't the real problem. The real poverty was ignoring my purpose. When Jonah finally obeyed and went to Nineveh, everything shifted. An entire city was changed. And in my life, when I finally stopped running and started listening, when I said yes to learning, to building, to creating, my life began to change too. The hardest part wasn't the work. The hardest part was deciding I was done running, and maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you've been on your own boat to Tarshish, convincing yourself you're just waiting for the right time. But deep down, you know, the longer you run, the longer you delay the life you're actually meant to live. The question is, are you ready to stop running? Because here's the thing, when you run from God's calling, you're not just running from a task, you're running from the very reason you were put on this earth. In Genesis, before there was sin, before there was struggle, before there was even work as we know it, God gave humanity its first purpose: be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Fruitfulness was never just about having children. It was about expansion, multiplication, creating more from what's been given to you. It's about taking the seeds God placed in your life, your gifts, your talents, your resources, your opportunities, and producing something from them. But when you run, when you choose comfort over calling, you can't multiply anything. You're too busy holding on to what little you have, scared to let go, scared to trust. That's why Jonah ended up in the belly of a fish. It wasn't punishment, it was a pause. A moment where everything else stopped, so he could finally face the truth. His life was not his own, and neither is yours. For years, I lived like my time was mine. I did enough to get by, but my days were filled with distractions, online games, endless scrolling, excuses that felt comfortable. I told myself, I'll do something with my life later. But later is a thief. It robs you of the present, one day at a time, until you look back and realize nothing has changed. It wasn't until I learned what Myron Golden calls the be-do-have principle that things began to click. The world teaches you that if you want something, you have to have more first. Have more money, have more resources, have more opportunities. Then you can do what you want and be who you want to be. But that's completely backwards. God's order is this. First, you be the person you were created to be. Then you do the work that person would do. And only then will you have the results that person would have. Jonah's problem wasn't that he didn't have the right tools or the right resources. His problem was that he wasn't being the obedient messenger God called him to be. And because of that, he didn't do what God told him to do. so he couldn't have the results God promised. And I had the same problem. I wanted the have, the income, the freedom, the stability, without first becoming the kind of person who deserved it. I wanted the harvest without planting the seed. I wanted the fruit without cultivating the tree. Once I stopped running and decided to be the person God called me to be, disciplined, focused, willing to grow, my actions changed naturally. I started doing the kind of work that aligned with my calling, not just work that kept me busy. And when I did, the have part came almost as a byproduct. My business grew. My income multiplied. My life expanded. Not because I chased money, but because I aligned with my purpose. That's why running from God's calling is so dangerous. You might still work, you might still hustle, you might still look busy, but none of it will satisfy because it's not aligned. You can be productive and still be running in the wrong direction. You can be balanced and still be empty. When Jonah finally said yes, he stepped into alignment. He became the messenger God had called him to be. That's when he could finally do the mission God set before him. And because he did, an entire city was spared, a result he never could have achieved by running. So I'll ask you again, are you ready to stop running? Not just from a task, but from the person you were created to be? Are you ready to trust that the one who gave you your purpose also gave you everything you need to fulfill it? Because if you are, the be do have principle will no longer be a theory. It will be the way you live. You'll be the person, you'll do the work, and you'll have the life God intended. A life that multiplies, that bears fruit, that leaves a legacy. The choice is yours. Keep running to Tarshish or turn toward Nineveh. One leads to exhaustion. The other leads to expansion. Jonah's story shows us something most people don't want to admit. It's possible to be busy. It's possible to be in motion. It's possible to be working hard every day and still be running in the wrong direction. That's why Jonah's journey to Tarshish wasn't rest. It wasn't progress. It was just a long, exhausting detour away from what mattered. And if we're honest, that's exactly where a lot of us are right now. We've mastered the art of being busy, but not fruitful. We wake up tired, we go through routines, we fill every slot in our calendar, but at the end of the week, the month, the year, what do we have to show for it? A paycheck that barely covers the bills, a tired body, and a quiet voice inside that keeps whispering, "This isn't what you were made for." That's what exhaustion looks like. The world has done a brilliant job of building a system that keeps people in that state. From the time you're a child, you're placed in a structure where you're rewarded for following orders, staying in line, and repeating information. School, for most people, is not built to awaken your God-given gifts. It's built to produce predictable, compliant workers who fit neatly into someone else's plan. You're told, work hard in school so you can get a good job. But what they don't tell you is that the good job is often just another version of Tarshish, a place that looks promising from a distance but keeps you far from your true calling. And in those jobs, the cycle continues. You trade hours for money. You show up on time. You meet the quota. You follow the script. You're productive in someone else's mission, but you're completely absent in your own. And because your paycheck comes regularly, it gives you just enough comfort to quiet the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, you're meant for something more. That's how society creates chaos. Not always by loud disasters, but by quiet misdirection. By keeping you so busy running in circles that you never stop to ask if you're on the right track. It's the same chaos Jonah experienced on the boat. The storm was real, but the real cause wasn't the wind or the waves. It was that Jonah was in the wrong place, going the wrong way. No amount of rowing harder would have saved that ship. The only way forward was to stop running and start obeying. And that's the difference between exhaustion and expansion. Exhaustion happens when your energy is spent fighting against the direction God is trying to take you. Expansion happens when you're aligned with it. Exhaustion feels like constant motion with no progress. Expansion feels like progress that multiplies beyond your own strength. When you're in expansion mode, small steps lead to big momentum. You're not just filling your schedule, you're filling your purpose. You're not just working for survival, you're building for legacy. That's where the be-do-have principle becomes so powerful. In exhaustion mode, you're trapped in the have-do-be lie. Once I have more time, more money, more resources, then I'll do the thing I'm meant to do, and then I'll be the person I want to be. But that day never comes, because the system is designed to keep you in need, always chasing, never arriving. In expansion mode, you flip it. You become the person first. You do the work that person would do. And then you have the results that life produces. Look at Jonah after he obeyed. Did the work suddenly get easy? No, but it became meaningful. He was no longer fighting against God's plan, he was walking in it. His obedience wasn't just for him, it brought life to an entire city. When you step into expansion mode, your work stops being about survival and starts being about impact. And here's the truth. Impact multiplies, survival just maintains. But society fears people who live in expansion mode because they can't be controlled in the same way. They can't be trapped by fear of losing a job because their identity isn't tied to that job. They can't be manipulated by scarcity because they understand that God is their source. So the system has to keep you in exhaustion mode. It keeps you distracted with entertainment so you never have the space to think. It keeps you drowning in debt so you never have the freedom to take risks. It keeps you addicted to comfort so you never endure the discomfort of growth. The enemy doesn't need to destroy your life to keep you from your calling. He just needs to keep you comfortable enough to never chase it. That's why focus is so rare. Because to focus, you have to choose expansion over exhaustion. You have to say no to 1,000 good things so you can say yes to the one thing you were created for. You have to turn off the noise so you can hear God's voice. You have to stop chasing balance when balance is just another word for divided attention. Jonah's story ends with obedience, but also with discomfort. Because walking in your calling doesn't mean everything will feel easy. It means everything will feel aligned. And alignment brings a peace that exhaustion never can. So the question becomes, which life do you want? The life where you're constantly rowing against the storm, or the life where the wind is at your back because you're finally going the right way? One leads to exhaustion, the other leads to expansion. The choice is yours. But know this, every day you stay in exhaustion mode, the world loses the fruit you were meant to produce. And every day you step into expansion mode, you multiply what God has placed in you, and your obedience becomes someone else's breakthrough. The moment I fully understood that, my whole perspective on why I do what I do shifted. For a long time, I thought the things God was asking me to do were just about me, about my growth, my survival, my success, my comfort. And yes, obedience will change your life. But what I've come to see is that it's rarely just about you. Jonah's obedience didn't just pull him out of the storm. It saved an entire city. His yes became the very thing that opened the door for other people to live, to change, to be restored. And that's the weight and the privilege of obedience. It multiplies beyond the person who says yes. When I began making these videos, I thought I was just sharing my own journey, the lessons I've learned, the mistakes I've made, the shifts that took me from broke to building wealth and freedom. But the more I do it, the more I realize that these words, this obedience to share, are not just for me. They're seeds. And seeds, when planted in the right soil, grow in places you'll never see. Jesus said something that has always stunned me. The works I do, you will do also, and greater works than these will you do. Think about that. The Son of God himself, the one who healed the sick, raised the dead, calmed storms, and forgave sins, looks at his followers and says, you're going to do more. Not because we're greater than him, but because obedience multiplies through generations, through people, through time. When Jesus walked the earth, his ministry was localized. He was one man, in one place, in one point in history. But through the obedience of his disciples, that message spread across nations, languages, and centuries. That's the power of multiplication. And that's why he told us to go and make disciples of all nations, because he knew that when we obey, our impact doesn't just add, it multiplies. And that's when it hit me. This is why I make these videos, because every time I obey that inner nudge to speak, to share, to teach, I'm not just helping myself. I'm opening the possibility that someone watching somewhere in the world will have a shift that changes their life. And that shift will ripple out into their family, their business, their community. That's why obedience matters more than vision. Vision shows you the picture of what could be, but obedience puts you in the position for that vision to happen. And the amazing part is, when you obey, you're not just stepping into your breakthrough, you're creating the pathway for someone else's. The Bible is full of this pattern. Moses obeyed, and an entire nation walked out of slavery. David obeyed, and a nation saw that giants could fall. Esther obeyed, and her people were saved from destruction. And of course, Jesus obeyed, and the entire human race was offered salvation. In every case, the obedience of one became the breakthrough for many. But here's the thing most people miss. Obedience often doesn't feel glamorous. It doesn't always feel like you're doing something world-changing in the moment. Jonah's obedience was just walking into a city and delivering a message. Your obedience might be starting the business you've been delaying, having the hard conversation you've been avoiding, or sharing a truth you're afraid will be misunderstood. It might look small to you, but to someone else, it's the key that unlocks the prison door. And here's where it gets even more amazing. Obedience multiplies in ways you can't predict. You might think you're helping one person, but you have no idea who they'll help because of the breakthrough they received. You might think you're making one video, but you have no idea who will watch it, when they'll watch it, or what they'll do because of it. That's why obedience is a higher form of success than just chasing results. Results are measurable. You can see them, count them, track them. But obedience produces outcomes that can't be measured in numbers, because they're measured in eternity. Now let's bring it back to Jesus' words. Greater works than these will you do. That's not just a nice-sounding verse, it's a statement of multiplication. It means what starts with one act of obedience in your life can produce more fruit than you could possibly grow on your own. And that's because obedience aligns you with the laws of God. And God's laws are designed for increase. Look at the first command given in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. That wasn't just about having children. It was about taking the gifts, resources, and calling God has placed in you and producing something that grows, reproduces, and expands. Fruitfulness is God's design. Multiplication is His nature, and obedience is the doorway to both. This is also where the be-do-have principle ties in. When you become the kind of person who obeys, you will do the kind of actions that create fruitfulness, and you will have the results of multiplication. Most people try to skip the be part. They want to have more before they change who they are. But multiplication doesn't work that way. God increases those who are aligned with His purpose, not just those who have big dreams. And here's the sobering part. Disobedience doesn't just delay your blessing. It delays the breakthrough for the people connected to you. Jonah's delay meant Nineveh's delay. If he hadn't turned back, the people he was called to reach might never have heard the message in time. That's why I can't afford to run from my calling anymore. That's why these videos matter. That's why your obedience matters. Someone's waiting on the other side of it. When you obey, you create a ripple that reaches further than your own life. You might not see all the waves it makes, but they're happening. And one day, in ways you never imagined, you'll hear the stories. So the real question is, if you knew that your yes to God today could break chains for someone else tomorrow, would you still run away like Jonah, or would you step into expansion? Because remember, one leads to exhaustion, the other leads to expansion. And when you choose expansion, you're not just building your own life. You're unlocking the lives of others.